This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Hello and welcome to Dialogue. Two black swan events, namely the COVID-19 pandemic and the Russia-Ukraine conflict, are causing great uncertainty and concerns worldwide. And the world is facing unprecedented levels of humanitarian need. What aid has been provided to those severely affected by the pandemic and the war? And how can international organizations facilitate better cooperation among different countries in their response to humanitarian crises? To discuss these issues and more, I'm glad to speak to Jagan Chapgan, Secretary General of the International Federation of Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies. That's our topic. I'm Xu Qinduo. Welcome to our show, Mr. Jagan Chapgan. Over the past 2 years, the outbreak, the COVID-19, I know your organization, IFRC, has been closely involved in providing the needs and the health and relief to a lot of people around the world. Tell us over the past 2 years, your work, and also how has IFRC adjusted its strategy, to help those in need of vaccination, for example?
Thank you so much for having me. As you rightly said, my organization, International Federation of Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies, or in short IFRC, have been involved on the COVID-19 response from the very beginning. Initially, we started the response as a health response, crisis response. It started as a pandemic and is very quickly spread all over the world. So the initial response was linked to a health response. But very quickly, we realized that the pandemic was also having a socioeconomic impact, especially among the more vulnerable communities, in more poorer communities, in the refugee camps, migration populations. So the people who were already marginalized and vulnerable were disproportionately affected by the COVID-19. So we also adjusted our strategy to include the socioeconomic impact on top of a health impact. What we also very quickly realized was the COVID-19 impact on the mental health of the population affected was growing very rapidly. With the lockdowns and with the uncertainty, many people losing their families and friends, the effect on the mental health of the population was getting quite severe. So we also had to strengthen our support around the mental health activities. And finally, we realized that it was also having a severe impact on our membership organizations, our national Red Cross societies, Red Crescent societies, like the Red Cross Society of China, when it comes to China, that it is also impacting their capacity, the volunteers, the staff, their fundraising ability to sustain the programs beyond COVID-19 was becoming more and more challenging. So we also then started mobilizing our own international capacity, but more importantly, the capacity of our member national societies to support each other. So the crisis, which started as a health crisis, we had a significant strengthening of the mental health program, strengthening of the socioeconomic impact program, and then also the institutional capacity development program. Now, of course, as the vaccine got developed, and I must say that there was a tremendous global solidarity on developing the vaccines. And I think the science, the knowledge sharing among the scientists, among the countries, was exemplary this time. And because of that, the vaccines were developed quite quickly and they're tested very quickly and approved very, very quickly. And many of the countries, of course, started delivering the vaccines already more than a year ago. And one of the positive of the vaccine is developed very, very quickly. And many countries started rolling out the vaccines very, very quickly. But the downside of this has been that the vaccine hasn't been shared equitably globally. So most of the countries with resources, or the richer countries, if I can put it that way, have been able to deliver the vaccines much quicker while the poorer countries haven't been able to get the vaccines in a timely manner. So that inequity in delivery of the vaccine have been the downside of this COVID-19 response.
Mm-hmm. Well, speaking of the vaccination, as you said, there's a downside to this global work, let's say. Where are we now? I think we have an international goal, to vaccinate 60% of the global population, in particular for those low-income countries. Where are we now?
I think the progress is a bit mixed. I think the developed and richer countries have achieved those already, and some of these countries have already managed to sort of get rid of some of the restrictions around the COVID-19. But when we look into the countries, particularly in Africa and some of the countries in Asia and in Latin America, the vaccination rate is still very, very low. And actually in some countries less than 10%. So I think the inequity is still very, very large. And we do not want, and I think it would be very, very unfair if the COVID-19 becomes the diseases of the poor. I think that will be a very sad thing to do. It's very, very important that the countries which have ability to share the vaccines, which have ability to actually provide the vaccines to the countries which haven't received the vaccines is extremely important for two reasons. One is, of course, in my view, it's a moral obligation of the countries who can to help the countries who need the help. But it's also a very, very solid medical reason, scientific reasons to do this. Because if the virus is not controlled everywhere in the world, it can spread very, very quickly. The new variant can develop, more dangerous variants can come, and it can spread very, very quickly. And also to the countries, who have managed to do much better in controlling the spread of the virus. So both for moral reasons and health and scientific reasons, that much bigger global solidarity and generosity is needed. But on top of that, in many of the countries, because the public health infrastructure has been weak even before the COVID-19, and COVID-19 has made them even weaker. So there has to be a slightly more holistic approach to this. The vaccine alone will not be enough. These countries also need support to develop the capacity to deliver the vaccines. Mm-hmm. So meaning that investing additional resources and also investing on their public health capacity would be extremely important alongside the vaccines.
Yes, well said. You mentioned about not only probably the lack of vaccine, but also the tools and also the facilities. Tell us, what are the major reasons, factors probably in affecting this vaccine gap, let's say? Is it because of the lack of access, or because of the facilities? For example, you have to have the storage, it's minus 70 degree, for example. And also, is that because of, political reasons? There are some low-income countries in particular. There's a low level of vaccination. And what is IFRC doing to help mitigate the issue?
I think it's probably the combination of all the reasons you described. I think initially, of course, it was the unavailability of vaccines. There's not enough vaccines available. So meaning that the countries who could afford to pay actually were the one to deliver the vaccines. At least that was initial. But right now, I think the number of vaccines that's being produced is probably enough to cover the entire world. I think there is enough supply now happening. Now, the first step is actually to share those vaccines and actually transport those vaccines to the countries who need them. But really, more importantly, the infrastructure and the logistics capacity and the public health capacity, once the vaccines are received, the ability to actually get the vaccines from the airport tarmac to the arms of the people, it's a massive logistics operations, plus a massive health operation. As you mentioned, the capacity to store the vaccines in a safe manner, as some of the vaccines require minus 70, as you said. To safely transport those vaccines and then actually organize those vaccine deliveries. And in some of the countries, the health infrastructure is so weak, it's very difficult for them to organize the vaccines distribution itself. But also in some of the countries, a lot of the data is done manually, meaning that once the people get the first dose of the vaccine, second dose of the vaccines, these informations are manually kept. That means they have to be manually followed up. That requires a lot of work and a lot of capacity in those countries. We identified this could be a major challenge, and we actually came up with our plan to support some of these countries and the more marginalized and the vulnerable communities. How can we support the national health system to actually deliver some of those vaccines? And I think our Red Cross Red Crescent societies almost in 172 countries have been involved in supporting their health ministries and the health system to deliver, to organize and to deliver the vaccines. But one big element on the vaccination, as you know, has been the vaccine hesitancy. In many communities, there have been lack of trust on the vaccines. And of course, with the disinformation and the fake news circulating has resulted in people not having trust on vaccines. And this has been one of our main area of contribution. Is the Red Cross, we are present in the local communities. Our volunteers come from the local communities. They are generally trusted by the local communities. So actually getting the message that the vaccines are safe, this is how vaccine can be received, this is how vaccine can be delivered, and sometimes actually helping people to get the vaccines. And in some of the countries, actually, we have the Red Cross run vaccination centers also. So I think we have been supporting these vaccination efforts in multiple ways in around 172 countries. But some of this work needs to continue, especially in those countries, as I mentioned earlier, which have a very low vaccination rate, particularly in Africa, but also some part of Asia and some part of Latin America.
Mm-hmm. We'll speak of the vaccine. One of the provider, of course, is China. As a developing country, China provided the vaccine to 120 countries and international organizations. If we compare it to, say, several years ago, China was basically able to sustain by itself or on the receive ends of vaccines from other countries. I wonder, how do you make of that?
For me, I think this is an incredible show of global solidarity at the time of massive global crisis. And I think China deserves all the credit for that incredible generosity and the show of solidarity. And I think, as you mentioned, in a short years, for China to develop that capacity, to be able to share more than 2 billion doses of vaccine, but at the same time, to really encourage others also to join the global solidarity. For me, this is a very, very positive example of how the pandemic like this one should be fought globally. The pandemic of this nature, the global pandemic, cannot be fought, cannot be defeated without a full global solidarity. So I think from the IFRC point of view, we greatly appreciate that solidarity shown by China, but also including the Chinese Red Cross, because the Chinese Red Cross have also been supporting some of our global efforts to get the vaccines in some of the places which absolutely needed the vaccines. Especially the early last year. In the beginning, even the health staff, some of our volunteers needed the vaccines so that they can continue to provide that service. So I greatly appreciate the China solidarity, and this is the only way we can fight and defeat the pandemic like this one.
Mm-hmm. Mr. Tabagan, I know it's not exactly the time to look back, to review and draw conclusions, but to prepare better for a future pandemic at this scale, say 15 or 10 years from now. What kind of lessons do you think we should learn, and how we be better prepared in terms of global coordination to respond quickly, efficiently, and effectively to such a pandemic?
You are absolutely right. I think there is still a lot to learn, and I think the learning probably takes some more time for us to be fully ready. But there are a few lessons learned we already have. the one lessons learned is important to invest on the public health infrastructure, and at the community level preparedness is extremely, extremely important. As we saw, when the pandemic started affecting the villages and the communities, the local level, if that local infrastructure is not strong enough, the national infrastructure collapses. And we saw that even in rich countries, in the early days, the hospital system was completely collapsed. Even in the developed world, even in the G7 countries, the health system was unable to cope with the early, the impact of the pandemic. And one of the reasons for that is the weaker public health system at the community level. So imagine, in the countries in Africa, South Asia, or the Latin Americas, where the economic development is not at the same level, if the local infrastructure, the community level preparedness, community level surveillance system is not strong, it of course is very, very difficult to control the spread of the virus. And the death rate generally goes very high. So this is one very important lesson learned. Invest at the community level, invest at the public health infrastructure at the lowest level possible. That's the first lesson learned. The second lesson learned is really around the communication. How do we communicate, the ability to communicate the right message? One of the problems we faced in this pandemic was the spread of the disinformation, misinformation, and the fake news. So our ability to communicate the right message and consistent message globally is very, very important to develop that capacity globally. Third lessons learned is investing in science and trust in science and technology. And that global solidarity in science is extremely, extremely important. And I must say, even during this pandemic, the solidarity around that research and development was rather positive. And as we saw, that leading to a rapid development of the vaccine. And I think that is very important, that investment on research and development has to continue. And not to stop that once this pandemic is over, hopefully it will be soon, stop investing in research and development. I think that must not happen. That has to be continuous development and research and sharing of the knowledge. That will be very, very important. And I think the fourth element, which we talked also a bit earlier, is we cannot respond effectively to a global pandemic without a global solidarity and global generosity. Unfortunately for virus, there is no border, there is no passport control or immigration. You cannot stop virus through your border controls, unfortunately. It finds a way to cross the border. So that means we will need that global solidarity, and we will have to respond in every country in the world, and that is possible only through the global solidarity. So these are, in my view, some of the lessons learned we can already use to invest and to prepare for any future pandemic.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's move on to the Ukraine crisis, where your organization IFRC is at forefront to provide relief, provide assistance to those fleeing Ukraine. Tell us how bad the humanitarian situation is.
The humanitarian situation is tremendous, and it's quite worrying. The impact of the conflict on civilian populations. Of course, that's the humanitarian impact is our major concern. So our organization, the Red Cross Red Crescent family, have been working from day one. The Ukrainian Red Cross, of course, in the country have been providing initially with the relief supplies, the foster supply, the psychosocial support, and now actually getting into more providing cash assistance to the people in Ukraine, but also in the neighboring countries, all the countries who have received the Ukrainian people who have actually crossing the border as refugees. They have been also providing that support. So the impact on civilian population, the humanitarian impact on civilian population is enormous.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned this cash assistance. Are you referring to this largest ever, what do we call like emergency financial assistance program to these refugees, about 2 million of those people? Tell us how this program is going on now.
Yeah, so this was something we planned from very early on, because what we thought was the cash assistance is the most dignified way of supporting people. Once people get the cash in their hand, they can buy what is most important for them in a very dignified manner. So from the very beginning, we have planned to include cash assistance as our largest cash assistance, emergency cash assistance program. Of course, we are coordinating with other agencies and organizations. It's very important that we do this in a coordinated manner, and very important that we are also doing this in accordance with the national system. So doing it in very close coordination with the national governments. So in some of the countries, the rollout of the cash assistance program has already started. Like in Slovakia, the Ukrainian refugees living in Slovakia have started receiving cash assistance already. In Romania, they have already started receiving cash assistance. Poland, they have already started receiving cash assistance. And in Ukraine, we are in a very last phase of finalizing the program with other organizations and with the government. And as soon as that is done, we can start rolling out the cash assistance program. And our aim is to reach 2 million people, both inside Ukraine and in the neighboring countries, with the cash assistance.
Mm-hmm. Well, of course, we are seeing this recorded number of people fleeing this country or fled this country. And then, inside this country, also civilians are being affected. The report says there is like 7 million people basically internally displaced. Is IFRC also doing something to help to provide relief to those people?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. So I think in the neighboring countries, it has been primarily the cash assistance program and the psychosocial support, mental health support. Inside Ukraine, the strategy includes, of course, initially providing the relief supplies, relief materials, in the form of food, clothes, and also medical supplies, and in some places, water, to the extent we can. At the same time, the first aid program has been very, very important, because the people who are living in the shelters, or in the railway stations, and some of the health infrastructure have been damaged. So that means the first aid becomes very, very important part of the program inside countries. So the relief supplies, food, water, medicines, first aid support, and we are now building the cash assistance program inside Ukraine too.
You mentioned earlier, like misinformation, disinformation. We also noticed that the Red Cross was accused of supporting Moscow or engaging in quote forced evacuation to Russia. What's your response to that?
Yeah, I think you are absolutely right. That's a disinformation. That's absolutely not true. The Red Crescent movement stays neutral and impartial in this type of situation. The Red Crescent movement never participates in forced evacuations. So these informations are unfortunately completely wrong. And this is really unfortunate that a neutral and independent and impartial organizations like the Red Crescent movement is accused of these things which are completely untrue.
Right. I know besides pandemic, besides the war, the conflict, and also your organization, IFRC, is also following the impact of climate change. I want to have your comments. Recently you see this record high temperature, monthly record high temperature in India, in Pakistan, in decades. And then in Hong Kong, you see the coldest day in 100 years. So we are seeing more frequent and also more extreme weathers as part of the climate change.
Absolutely. And we have been saying that climate change is the most consequential crisis we are dealing with at the moment, because its impact would be so huge, and its impact would be in every sector of the society, and its impact would be medium and long term. So just a few examples you gave, the extreme heat or the extreme cold, extreme rain or the extreme drought. In the same countries, we have a place facing the drought, and we have places facing the floods. So you could see already the massive humanitarian impact of the climate crisis on populations. We are already seeing that. From the IFRC point of view, we have seen that 83% of the disasters we supported in last few years have been related to the climate-related disaster, 83%. And we could see both the frequency and the severity of the climate-related disasters are getting worse and worse every year. So it's very important that we come up with the concrete actions on both climate mitigation and climate adaptation. This should be very, very important. I know a number of countries, including China, have made some bold commitments globally to really change the course of the climate crisis. But I think all the governments needs to make those bold commitments and come up with the actions to actually turn the tide. Otherwise, I think the impact of the climate crisis in the global systems overall would be very, very severe.
Mm-hmm. Well, there's obviously an urgency for all the countries, organizations joining hands to fight climate change. But unfortunately, because of the pandemic, because of the ongoing crisis in Ukraine, we are seeing, food crisis, energy shortages. So we are seeing basically countries are urged to produce more oil and gas, for example, the fossil fuel, instead of reducing the dependence on those fossil oil. Do you see this, this kind of a frustration, right? We need more forward-looking solutions instead of looking back to seek solutions. So, what do we need to do? I know it should be temporary. It's a short period of time, but the long term, probably we should invest more of energy, of time, politics to deal with this problem, because this is only one planet.
Well, you are absolutely right. I think as we saw the impact of the COVID-19 and of course now the conflict in Ukraine, clearly they are creating the challenges on our action on the climate crisis. But at the same time, they could also offer us an opportunity. Every crisis can also be an opportunity if we manage it appropriately. For example, in COVID-19, most of the countries have committed billions of dollars on recovery from the COVID-19. Now, if we can use those investment, the billions of investment, in a green way, in a climate smart way, so the recovery from the COVID-19 can be a green recovery. And I think it is possible because the countries have committed billions and billions of dollars on the COVID-19 recovery. It could be the same also with the conflict. As you said, there may be a short-term impact because transition does take some time. But this could be a trigger to invest on more greener energy sources, and there is clearly a much more localized, greener energy opportunities. And I know many countries have already done, and I know China and India have been leading on the solar energy globally. So I think there could be, this crisis could be an opportunity to invest on greener energy in the medium and long term and actually reduce the dependence on the fossil fuel. So this crisis, but also there could be opportunities.
Thank you, Mr. Tabakan. Thank you for speaking to us.
Thank you for having me.
With that, we come to the end of today's show. You can also find us on the CGTN app on YouTube. I'm Xu Qinduo. Thanks for being with us. See you next time.